What's happening, everybody? It's Dom from Lensprotogo and Lens Rentals. Welcome back to the channel. So this setup I have right here, a Canon 1DX and a Canon 70-200 2.8L, is a legendary photo setup. It's just that prolific across like professional sports photography, news and journalism, really just professional photography in any realm. And this 1DX line has been out for like 10 years now. This is the newest version, the 1DX Mark III, but the original EOS 1DX came out back in 2012. So this 1DX body across all versions has had a nice healthy sit at the helm of Canon's professional photo body line until now. This is the EOS R3, Canon's first flagship mirrorless camera body. And it's kind of undoubted at this point that we're in this like paradigm shift towards mirrorless shooting, so it only makes sense that Canon pulls out all those professional stops that we've seen in their DSLR flagship and put them into this mirrorless flagship body. And it is impressive, to say the least. Now that I've had some time to get some hands-on shooting done with this bad boy, I think that I want to take this video to offer up 6 reasons that I think 1DX shooters need to switch to the R3. And in this video, I'll be comparing the R3 to the latest version of the 1DX, the Mark III. But just know that if you're coming from a previous version of the 1DX, like the 2 or the OG, some of these changes are going to be even more drastic, like the inclusion of that CF Express media that went into the Mark III, and also the leaps and bounds in video capabilities that went into the later versions of the 1DX. And also, I'll take this time to mention, even though that it's not one of the following 6 reasons in this video, but the EOS R3 retails $500 cheaper than the newest version of the 1DX, the Mark III, currently. So just something to ponder. But anyways, let's jump into these 6 reasons. Reason number 1, size and weight. The R3 is considerably smaller than the 1DX. The grip feels about the same shape, button layout hasn't really changed much, and they share the same LPE19 battery. But otherwise, the 1DX is wider than the R3 and taller with this little hump at the top for the prism. DSLRs, am I right? And this is huge. The R3 weighs 2.2 pounds with the battery and media there, compared to the 3.17 pounds of the 1DX with the battery in there. So 1 pound off coming from body to body. And paired up with the 70-200 2.8 in their corresponding lens mounts like I have here, the EF and the RF, now we're talking about a 6.5 pound setup coming down to a 4.5 pound setup, 2 whole pounds basically off its DSLR counterpart. And if this setup here looks familiar to you, it might be because you've spent a really long, grueling day shooting with this exact photo lens combo, so you'd know that taking 2 whole pounds off this setup would be an absolute game changer for shooting like a 4+ hour event, especially if this is not the only camera that's attached to you. All right, reason number 2, we've got a new and improved sensor. The EOS R3 has a 24.1 megapixel stacked CMOS sensor compared to the regular CMOS design in the 1DX, and that's a 20.1 megapixel. So an increase in resolution there, but also that stacked CMOS design in the R3 is going to help the video capture end of things greatly. ISO capabilities are slightly different between bodies. The R3 only has one value in that extended high ISO range, 204,800, where the 1DX has 2 values past that. But personally, I think the R3 handles high ISO shooting a bit better. We also have a huge increase in the number of phase detection autofocus points in this new imager. The R3 has 1,053 AF points, where the newest version of the 1DX only has 191. And we're actually getting to a pretty crazy autofocus thing down the line. It's one of the other reasons, so just keep that in mind. Another absolutely huge thing, the R3 has IBIS. 5-axis in-body image stabilization, where the 1DX line has always relied on lens stabilization. And this honestly should have been a reason in and of itself, but I kind of just clumped it into the center talk. Anyways, this obviously has enormous benefits for video shooting, but on the photo end of things, this will stabilize the image a lot more if you need to shoot at slower shutter speeds. And just one last thing I want to squeeze in here, not really like a sensor thing, more like programming, but on the R3, you'll be able to choose different sizes of aspect ratios for those JPEGs and HEIFs. So you could shoot it right to 16:9, 1:1, awesome. Okay, moving right along to reason number 3, 30 frames per second burst shooting in electronic shutter mode on the R3. This is absolutely huge. That's 10 frames per second faster than the 20 frames per second electronic burst from the 1DX. But this stat is potentially backed up with 2 potential downsides, depending on how you look at things. But the image buffer is going to cap out at 150 raw images on the R3 shooting at 30 frames per second, where the 1DX will buffer 1,000 raw images in that 20 frames per second shooting. Also, the 1DX's mechanical shutter will actuate faster than the R3. This will take 16 frames per second mechanical shutter shots, where the R3 is going to take 12 frames per second. One thing the mirrorless R3 is going to do, which is equally huge, maybe depending on who you ask, but that's going to let you look through the viewfinder while shooting that 30 frames per second electronic burst with no blackout. On the 1DX, you could be shooting in electronic shutter mode, but you're limited to composing off that LCD screen. And if you're shooting mechanically, you can look through the viewfinder, of course, but if you're shooting high burst mode, you're gonna get that crazy strobing from the mirror system just flapping around like crazy in there, which can be really distracting. All right, since we're on the topic of viewfinders, here's that crazy autofocus thing that I mentioned earlier on the R3. Reason number 4, eye control autofocus through the EVF. Now, when I say eye control, I'm not talking about having control over which eye the camera system focuses to on your subject. That's cool, but we're way past that. We're talking about your eye. With this function on, the R3's viewfinder will detect where your eye is looking in the frame and let you snap to that point with a half press of the shutter. And that point is indicated by a little orange circle that sort of darts around the screen. And if it's properly calibrated, it is shockingly accurate. It suggests you calibrate it for every user, and it lets you save a couple of calibration profiles. And once I did this, calibrated to my own eye, I found that it worked really, really well. And I know something comes out like this and you're like, that's kind of gimmicky. I don't know if I would ever use it. It probably doesn't really work that well. In my experience, it works actually really, really well. And I think this could be a really cool tool to be able to catch an unexpected focus point in your frame while maintaining composition. Sometimes you don't want to be thumbsticking the focus area across the screen or moving around messing up your composition to just grab another focus point. This is just at the beginning of this technology and it works really, really well. All right, reason number 5, the flip out LCD screen on the R3. So yes, not only is the LCD screen in the fully articulating style on the R3, but it is also a lot more high res at over 4 million dots compared to the 2.1 million dots of the 1DX. The flip out screen is excellent for taking video on the R3, but in photo mode, this is also great for just shooting really high or really low angles or just really weird, obscure angles. Or at the very least, this allows you to flip the screen in for storage, which will preserve it much better. All right, finally, reason number 6, video recording. And I saved video specs and stuff for last because I understand that most 1DX shooters are probably almost exclusively taking photos with this body. But with that being said, I feel like I have to mention the video upgrades to the R3 because they are significant. The 6K resolution is a flat 6K horizontal pixel count at 6000 by 3164 compared to the smaller 6K mode of the 1DX. And high frame rate shooting is going to go up to 100 frames per second in 4K as opposed to the 4K 60 in the 1DX. Also, I mentioned this earlier, but IBIS is going to be a huge benefit for video shooting, and paired with lens stabilization is absolutely rock solid. And that flip out touchscreen with tap to focus is pretty darn great for video too. And I think works especially great on the Canon mirrorless system. And lastly, for video improvements, the R3 is going to give you unlimited recording times, where on the 1DX, that's going to limit your recording times to 30 minutes per clip. And so with that, that's pretty much going to wrap up this video on my 6 reasons that 1DX shooters need to ditch this flappy old mirror box for Canon's flagship mirrorless body. All right, that was a little bit harsh. The 1DX is a perfectly great camera, especially the Mark III, but after shooting on both of these cameras for about a week or so now and compiling this list, it's getting harder and harder for me to make the argument for the 1DX over the R3. It really is just that impressive. And this is only the first version of this camera. I'm sure we're in for some great improvements to the later versions of this body. So if you have any questions or insights about how these two camera bodies stack up, or you want to make your case for the 1DX over the R3, let me know in the comment section below and we'll start a discussion. Also, if you happen to like this video, hit it with a thumbs up button down below to let me know you liked it. And if you're not already for whatever reason, subscribe to the channel. And if you are subscribed, you can actually hit that little bell button down there to be notified whenever we post new content, which is every week. So take care, and we'll see you in the next one.